Okay, let's get serious. Let's go to Bob Chapman, who had the biggest newsletter in the financial newsletter in the world till he retired more than a decade ago. Of course, the biggest private silver and gold broker. He's lived all over the world, South Africa, France, Germany, you name it. During the break, we've got to get the plug. Max was telling me how for decades he's been reading what Bob Chapman has to say. So there's another nomination for Bob as being one of the best experts and trends forecasters out there, especially on the markets. So we have a lot to talk about with him today, with the dollar plunge after UN call to ditch greenback and a lot more. But first, Bob, you heard me before Kaiser precipitated on cookies again, that my take on these Russian sex operatives, sleeper sex operatives is what I would call them, and the fact that they're trying to relaunch a new Cold War on the back of this. But more interestingly, that you see the Russians trying to infiltrate the gold and silver market to try to find out what's happening in New York, because they're big buyers, because they know it's rigged, and also infiltrating Harvard and Facebook-style systems. I mean, that's really where the real black ops are going on. Or do you disagree, Bob Chapman?
Well, it's certainly on the ground a type of counterintelligence, and you are very, very right in saying that is real spying. And you're right. Everything else is usually done by satellite today. And one of the complaints about the good guys inside the CIA is we didn't do any of that anymore, or we're not doing much of that anymore. And that's where the action is. And so the Russians have done it, and they've done it over and over again. And they're really good at it. I mean, people in America discount the abilities of people in other countries. The Russians are very bright people. I know, I worked against them. And so it's not surprising they have such units within the United States, and they probably are guilty. But I think in your conversation with Max, the timing is very important. This has been a well-planned takedown and furtherance operation, perhaps because of the wearing out of the terrorism label, and maybe we got to find some no bogeyman, who in this case would be the Russians again. And yes, the Russians have been buying gold for a long time, and they're expediting their purchases. And we've covered all this in the International Forecaster. But I think, and I'm only guessing, that the Russians are monitoring, yes, I'll get it out, monitoring several publications. Mine's one of them, and Gather is another one. And they attended a very high Russian official from the finance division of the Russian government back about 8 years ago, attended one of Gather's meetings in Alaska. If I'm not mistaken, that's the location. And they got filled in, and they saw the direction that things would eventually have to go, and knew they had to accumulate. And they knew from attending that meeting and reading their stuff as well as mine that the markets are being rigged, and they wanted to be able to take advantage of it. In other words, like we'll take this recently, gold was taken down $35 or $40 in one day. And if they can know something like that ahead of time, they can go short, and then, like today, cover their short and go long as well. And so they are heavily playing the gold market, and they have, even when it was the Soviet Union.
Well, remember Dr. Titania Karajnia, what was it, about 8 years ago, one of their chief finance ministers, one of their chief think tank people, came out and said there's a $300 trillion group. They're the Illuminati. They call themselves the Deadhead Group, which translates into the English to skull and bones, the skull and crossbones, the Deadhead. And that they are planning to sell derivatives and destroy the world economy. I mean, that was in Newsmax, WorldNet Daily, Infowars.com. Rick Wiles covered it 8-9 years ago. And, I mean, I just forget how right we've all been about what these people were planning. And shifting gears, what does this signify, Bob? Because it's old news for our listeners and our audience and people that read your International Forecaster newsletter. But what does it signify to now have the UN, CNN, ABC News, AP, Reuters, all announced Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Today, it's made national news. Our story is one of the top stories on Drudge. Dollar plunges after UN call to ditch greenback. All of this is happening. And so what does it signify that they're coming out saying, okay, all the currencies are going to stay, but they're going to be devalued, and a private group of banks is going to run it, and it's going to be world government, as Herman von Rompuy said last November, the head of the EU, and you will now pay your carbon taxes to us, and we will have a new SDR over the whole globe. I mean, this is a private group of bankers that have created the fraud, openly announcing the takeover of our currency. This is the highest form of economic takeover, and everyone involved in the government is guilty of high treason.
And that's absolutely so. It doesn't mean they're going to be successful in doing what they're doing. They're having to expedite their program for the very reasons that you and I have discussed over and over again, and that is we're letting people know exactly what they're doing, how they're doing it, and what they expect as a final product. I think that you have to look at the directions that they've gone in recently. I think Greece blew up in their face, and they still may very well lose, they being the Illuminists, the services of Papandreou, because I keep on drilling them over there to get rid of them. And maybe that will have an effect. But that's what they need to do, and they need to default, get out of the euro, go to the drachma, and also cut expenses in government by 30%.
Yeah, for those that don't know, explain to them that Goldman Sachs has its officials that 10 years ago set Greece up, now actually running the takeover and the handover of 600 islands.
That's correct. And, of course, the puppet master in this game is not only Goldman Sachs, but the Bilderberger Papandreou. And I told him, I said, if you have, they just did another documentary. I don't think it's been released yet. But I told him, I said, if you can impeach him, however you do it, get rid of him. And you don't want to let any of your islands go for 20 or 30 cents on the dollar to a group of Illuminists.
Well, I mean, literally, they swindle them selling them these derivatives, and then the country is selling the islands to the heads of the brokerage firms by name that set them up. I mean, they should be calling for these people's arrest, not giving them their islands and their highways. Hi. Coming up in the next segment, we're going to be taking some of your phone calls, and I'm going to play this clip and get Bob Chapman's take on it of Congressman Pete Stark. You've seen little clips on the news the last few days, but we have the whole 10-minute exchange posted up at Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com, where he just says there's no problem with the border, and anybody that wants to control the border wants to kill people. I mean, their propaganda is just arrogantly delivered. It's asinine. And we see this throughout history where elites get into trouble. A lot of times they just become even more arrogant. And that only hastens their implosion. But Bob, I'm starting to think more and more Gerald Celente may be right again, putting a date on it. We've seen top New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and other writers saying we are in the Greatest Depression or the Third Depression. Obama's now calling it the Greatest Recession. By every yardstick, as you said 2 years ago, we are in a depression. Do you think they may announce it? Because they're now saying they're not going to have a second stimulus, which you've said would put this off another year.
Well, first of all, I think if they are going to say we're in a depression, they're going to wait until they start their war and then blame the depression on the war. That's logical, and that's what they've done before. And so that might be an up-and-coming event that may start out in a limited way with Iran and may spread. Russia may be brought into it, and the recent apprehension of these spies might be a lead into that. As you indicated, it could be a lead into something. And so, you know, the groundwork is there, and they could very well go ahead with it. But I don't think they're going to use the word depression. Maybe Paul Krugman can in the New York Times. But I don't think you're going to see it officially coming out from any important illuminist or the President of the United States until it's time. And as far as stimulus in the economy, I don't think under present circumstances they can get the stimulus they want, although maybe it's still possible. But, you know, the Federal Reserve is perfectly capable of putting $5 trillion into the economy between now and the election 2.5 years from now. And that could keep the markets up to an extent, although I do think they're going down. Maybe they wouldn't during that time period go as low as they might go. But they have the ability to keep the economy going sideways to slightly higher.